This episode is brought to you by the Command Presence Leadership Institute. Find out more by visiting commandpresence.net.
Welcome to the Faces of Leadership with Michael Warren. Be the leader you wish that you had.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Faces of Leadership podcast, where we believe that leadership is about two things. It's about people and it's about actions. We talk with leaders from across society who are stepping up to do what they can, where they are, with what they have. The question is, what can we learn from them? What can we learn from each other as we strive to be the leader we wish we had? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Warren, and I'm your host. Thank you for being with us today. And folks, I hope that you've had the chance to listen to episode 22 with Scott Medlin. Kind of ironic to me that in society today, it's considered acceptable to be passionate about things like sports. But it is often frowned on when people are passionate about things that actually matter. And Scott is passionate about important things. And more importantly, he's making a difference out there in an area that, quite honestly, we've gotten better at, but we need to continue to get better at. But on to today's guest. So our guest today retired as a lieutenant from the Gainesville, Florida Police Department in 2018 after doing 28 years in law enforcement and 2 years in corrections. Upon his retirement, he was the Training and Education Division Commander with the responsibility of training for the department. He has held many formal leadership roles, including Deputy District Commander, Patrol Commander, Shift Commander, and Field Training Officer Supervisor. And folks, I'm going to throw out there that Field Training Officer Supervisor, in my opinion and in my experience, is one of the most important positions in an agency or an organization. Taking care of our brand new folks sets us up for success. He also served as a background investigator and as a polygraph examiner. Our guest has been an instructor for over 25 years and has taught classes to basic students as well as executive level law enforcement officials. He teaches leadership and not only facilitates classes with advanced police concepts, but also facilitates leadership classes for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, IACP. He has taught criminal justice classes on a collegiate level and written a collegiate level program in criminal justice, which is still in use today. He is the senior lead instructor for both Advanced Field Training Officer course and Leadership for Frontline Supervisors for Advanced Police Concepts. He holds a master's degree in business administration as well as a Master of Arts in Criminal Justice. He continues to improve himself and his skills by attending advanced classes in how to be a master presenter. He frequently attends leadership classes and continues to develop curriculum for leadership and train the trainer courses. Our guest's significant contributions to the field of leadership were recognized by his induction into the National Society for Leadership and Success. He has published several articles on leadership and training in Police One, as well as an article on recruiting and retention for Police Chief Magazine. And something I'm really excited to talk to him about, he recently released his first book. And I call it his first book because I'm kind of putting him on the hook to write some more. But his first book is entitled A Lifetime of Service. Our guest is currently an adjunct instructor for the Southwest Virginia Criminal Justice Academy. When not teaching, he enjoys camping, fishing, and hiking with his wife of 25 years. Welcome to the episode, Wayne South. Welcome, Wayne. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Man, I tell you what, you listen to that stuff like there and you think, man,
who is that guy?
Yeah, well, it's like, hey, you know, if somebody ever has to do a eulogy for me, I got some good material sitting right there, right?
Yes, sir.
Wayne, I think it's important for, in the interest of transparency, that Wayne and I not only are what I consider colleagues, but this may be one-sided, but I also consider us friends.
Absolutely.
Wayne, where he works, is right around the corner from where my dad lives. And so I try to stop in at the academy whenever I'm down seeing my dad. But what Wayne has become an important person to me, folks, because he brings a wealth of experience in leadership, both in breadth and in depth. Guess let's start off today. What was your first foray, if you will, your first endeavor in the leadership category? What was the first leadership thing that you were involved with?
Oh my gosh, I think the very first leadership experience I had where I was sort of had control was in South Carolina when I worked there as a police officer. And our agency, this was in the early 90s, wanted to incorporate a community-oriented policing philosophy. And that had never been done at our agency. It was brand new. So I was sent to a few classes on community-oriented policing, and I was asked to put together a program for the agency, and not only put it together, but the difficult part was to sell it to the officers at the organization, because I was dealing with a mentality that wasn't very open, if you will. It was new, it was different, and they were very leery of anything community-oriented policing-wise.
It's funny you should say that, because that's been my experience on that particular topic right there, is that I actually wrote a class for in-service training one time that I entitled Tactical Community Policing. Because if you want to reach law enforcement, oftentimes if you paint it camo, which my slides were, and you name it tactical, they're more likely to listen, and you're less likely to get resistance. And Wayne, so I guess we'll go down this little rabbit hole right here.
Okay. Community
policing oftentimes in law enforcement is seen as soft. And yes, when we talk about leadership, quote unquote, soft skills often get a bad rap, talking about listening and communication and empathy. But those really are the core of leadership, and community policing should be the core of policing. So I guess, what are your thoughts on how did we get to this point where soft things take a bad rap?
Mike, I don't know how we develop that mentality. I can tell you from my experience in implementing that as a philosophy and not a program.
I like
and
it.
Teaching it to everyone at the organization from the day they start, they begin to realize how much more crime and how many more cases they could solve by getting out and talking to people in the community. And if you're not on that level, when I was an FTO, I incorporated the philosophy with my trainees, and let's get out of the car. Let's stop and talk to people who never see a person in uniform.
I love what you said there, by the way, because one of our recent guests, Chief Darren Galt, who's actually running for a vice president spot with IACP this year, he talked about when he got his police chief job, one of the first things he did was he did away with the community policing program. And he says, I don't want it to be something that some people do. He said, I want it to be what we do. I think that in order for that truly to take place in an organization, it does have to start at onboarding. It has to start at the FTO program.
It does. And just community-oriented policing leadership, it has to be a philosophy, and it needs to be rooted from day one, just like the tenets of leadership. Because if we do this, our officers are going to go out in the communities. They're going to have better interactions with the public. And I teach that we have this imaginary trust bank account, and that every time we go out and we have a good interaction with someone in the community, we make a deposit into this account. And when we slip up and we do things because we're human, we'll make a slight withdrawal from that bank account. But at the end of the day, the community still believes in the police department. We still have a balance in our trust bank account.
In order for that to happen, they have to know their police department. They have to know the people, and that only comes about through talking with them instead of talking to them.
Absolutely.
One of the things you just said right there, it really resonated with me. One of my favorite books is a book by Dan Cockrell called How's the Culture in Your Kingdom? And he makes a statement in there. He says that from a culture perspective, the most important day in your employees' cultural life is day one. Culture has to start day one, just like leadership has to start day one. And I think as leaders, we need to recognize that whoever we have doing our onboarding, and it doesn't matter if you're in policing or if you're in the service industry or you're a warehouse or electrician, whatever the case may be, day one, we need our cheerleader bringing our new people on. And if we don't, then we're setting our people up for bad culture.
Yes, and I've never done any research on this, but I think there's a large majority of our employees, regardless of the industry, that decide on day one if they made the right decision. And truly, is this the place where I need to be? And that's largely based on how they're treated on that first day.
It's interesting because not only do they make that decision, but that becomes their filter for how
Yes.
they view everything that happens. If there's something that happens to them, if they had a good experience, that they think there's good culture, they're going to say, "Oh, this is going to be a learning moment." But if we've got bad culture, or they think it's bad culture, they say, "Well, they're setting me up for failure. They're looking to get rid of me." And so I think it's really important for people in HR, for people in onboarding, for people in whatever you call your training program. We call it the FTO program. Those folks right there have to not only be proficient, they have to love the company, they have to love the organization, they have to love the job.
They do, and they become our best recruiters.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
That was your first foray into it, was working on this. And I guess at some point you said, you know what, South Carolina is a nice place, but I need to get further south. And so you ended up in Florida. How'd that happen?
Well, several of the people I was in the military with worked in Gainesville, the Gainesville Police Department, and they sort of recruited me down there, and started there in 1998. Became a field training officer within 3 years, which was our policy, which I absolutely loved. I love training new officers. Anyone that says that an FTO is not in a leadership position, I don't think has ever been an FTO, because you deal with everything from professional to personal issues in that car with your trainee. And learning how to deal with human emotion, learning how to deal with conflict, learning how to tell if someone gets it. Is your teaching style resonating with the person that's sitting in the car with you? And just trying new and creative things, thinking outside the box, because I believe if sometimes we get comfortable and we think in a very linear, straight line, and you really can't do that as a trainee. And then when I moved into the position of sergeant, it was exactly the same thing. You're dealing with human emotion, you're dealing with professional issues, you have to think creatively outside the box. And I believe that being an FTO truly set me up for success to be a sergeant.
Well, let's digress for a second, because you said military career. What's that all about?
Yes, I joined the Air Force in 1986. Went in the security forces. I needed to grow up a little bit and mature. I graduated high school in 1984. And I was just kind of bouncing around, taking some college classes, working part-time jobs, and really had no direction or discipline, if you will. So I thought the military would fix some of that, and it certainly did. I left as a sergeant after 4 years, went to some excellent leadership courses in the military, really enjoyed my time in the military, but I didn't go in with the intent to make it a career. So I just did my 4 years and took my honorable discharge and left.
It's funny how a military start often has lifelong impact. My dad was Air Force, and I was Army.
Right.
But the thing is, though, and you and I, we talk philosophically sometimes, but it's one of those things, when you graduate from high school, you may be legally an adult, but your brain is still developing. And this allows you to develop that under supervision while you're earning money. To me, in fact, I gotta give a shout out here. The week that this episode is going to be released, our CEO, John Bostaine, his son is going to be home. He's a United States Marine. It's going to be the first time he's been home in about a year and a half, 2 years, coming home from Okinawa. So Danny, thank you for your service, buddy. I hope you're enjoying your time at home, and I hope you have a Merry Christmas with your folks there. I can tell you, I've known him since he was a kid, and the difference that the military has had on him is just unbelievable in a positive way, Well, and I would be willing to bet that was your experience as well.
It was. And Mike, I will tell you, it took me years after I was discharged to realize why we did some things the way we did. And I won't go into that, but you understand. But it all comes down to attention to detail. And attention to detail in the military is imperative. Standing by your decision, whether it's right or wrong, because instructors will push you as far as they can to try to get you to change your mind. So many times in my career, I have seen leaders or people in leadership positions change their mind because it wasn't the popular opinion. And the military teaches you to stand by, make a decision and stand by it.
That is a skill that is applicable no matter what the profession is.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And if you do that, I think you're going to be a better leader and a better person for it. And yes, you are going to catch a little bit of grief, but that's okay.
Yeah, but as long as we see it as a learning experience, I mean, that's what it comes down to. If we can start looking at things as learning opportunities throughout our life, we get much more out of it.
Absolutely.
Now, I do want to go back just a second to your assertion about FTOs as leaders.
Yes.
Couldn't agree with you more. You truly are a leader of one, but there's one thing that's really been sticking out. You and I do work in the FTO world and FTO training and stuff. One of the things that I think that being an FTO, being a trainer, an initial trainer, no matter what the industry, it forces the trainer to get good at giving feedback. Because it's required on a regular basis. In an FTO program, you have to fill out your DORs. And you have to document and articulate what you saw. And you have to make it about actions, right? And
absolutely.
But so many people, and I'm not knocking them, but they just weren't afforded that. So many people struggle when they get that first leadership position with providing effective feedback because they've never had to do it before. They may have been a heck of an electrician, or they may have been a heck of a carpenter or a heck of a police officer, but they've never had to critique and give feedback to somebody. And that's one of the most important jobs as a leader, is to do that. And I think FTO prepares you for that better than just about anything else.
Absolutely. And you touched on it when you said effective feedback. A lot of FTOs are good at critiquing performance, but they're not really good at providing that constructive feedback where the trainee can improve.
I'll always say that a leader is kind of like a flashlight, that they should light the pathway to doing things correctly. And if all you do is tell them what they didn't do well, but don't show them the way forward, you're not really training, you're just documenting. And it's easy to document. It's very difficult to train.
Yes, sir, it is. Absolutely.
So you got promoted to sergeant. And how would you describe Sergeant South? What was that guy like?
Well, I would say Sergeant South was very much walking in the dark without a flashlight to begin with. Yeah, I had my ideas about how things should be, but I had enough sense, Mike, to go to the team and say, "Look, I'm a new sergeant. I'm not going to make all the right decisions. I'm not even going to tell you I'm going to make good decisions. I will make a decision, and I need you to help me become a good sergeant." And just that little bit of humility, the team just sort of circled the wagons, if you will. And that was the key to my success, if you will, as a sergeant. They really taught me how to be a leader.
It's funny you should say that right there, because one of our previous guests, Brian Uridge, worked in the largest public safety department in America.
Oh, wow.
He was very good at the police side, but when he got promoted, when the fire run came out, and he goes, I got there, and he goes, I'm looking at these people, and they've got more experience and more knowledge than I do. And he goes, I wish you could see the look on their face when I said, okay, what am I missing? Because they never had a leader before that admitted that, hey, you know what? You're probably better prepared to deal with this than me. Help me lead correctly.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And that can be kind of intimidating, if you will. And I'll give you an example. I made sergeant when I worked in South Carolina. And I went to a team, and my corporal was older than I was, had a lot more experience than I did. He actually walked a beat in Columbia, South Carolina, for the Columbia Police Department, and went to call boxes to get his calls. And to the day he retired, he carried his call box key in his hand, and he used it like a little fidget spinner.
No kidding.
And I'm like, how in the world am I going to win this guy over? And the same thing, I'm like, I know that you have a lot more experience than I do. You should be the sergeant, not me. Teach me what I need to do. I should get out a notebook and take notes from you. And we were friends to the day he died.
I asked you about Sergeant South. I need to tell you a little bit about Sergeant Warren, if I could, for a second.
Yes, sir.
Listen, buddy, I've got a lot of flaws. I'm a flawed human being, but probably my biggest flaw, especially early in my leadership career, was that I wanted everybody to be like me. You know, I wanted people to be like I was when I was in their position, and I was very close-minded.
I was as well.
Yeah, I wish I could go back and undo that because I probably messed some people up along the way, you know. So it's if you could go back now and you knowing what you know, because you've been at this for a long time. If you could go back now and you could have a conversation with Sergeant South right before he starts his first shift, you know, right before he opens his mouth for the first time as a leader, you know, what are some of the things, or what's one thing that you would tell him that would make him a better leader? As a result, it would be much better for his people.
I had a hard time, Mike, thinking on a global scale. I wanted to think solely as a sergeant and as a line officer, because for some, that's a difficult transition from line officer to sergeant. And I would tell myself to start thinking more like a chief of police, or at least a patrol commander, and stop trying to find all the negatives in the change. I was one of those people who, as soon as something would be sent out, a change, I would start trying to find the negative in it. And I think if I would have been more positive early on in my career, I would have been more successful. Stay away from the negative people.
We're wired as human beings to gravitate towards those things that we feel comfortable with. And,
Yes.
and this has nothing to do with leadership. But this past weekend, my youngest son's a wrestler. And so there was our first tournament of the year.
Right.
My kids have been doing wrestling for several years now, and we've always used a particular bracket tracking system. This year we changed.
Right. Oh boy.
And so, man, I'm just dreading this experience right here.
Yes, sir.
But you know what though? At the end of the day, I was talking to the director of our club, and I said, "Buddy, I'm going to have to admit this. I like the new thing better. It navigates easier between one of the." But you're right. Why do we resist it so much, even when it's for our own good? I don't.
Because it's easy.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy.
It's because it's easy.
Yeah, I can't remember the quote they said, but we're cognitive misers. That we would rather stay with the what is familiar than to wrestle with the concept of the new.
Yes. And so, Mike, I was on midnight shift as a sergeant, and when I got promoted to lieutenant, the new sergeant came to me. He saw me in the hallway one day, and he came to me and he said, "Wayne, I'm taking over your team on midnights. I've got all of these great ideas on how we can change things. And what advice would you give me?" And I didn't remember this, but I just looked at him and I said 3 words: leave them alone. And a couple of years ago, I saw him at a conference in Orlando I was speaking at, and he came up to me and he said, "Wayne, as long as I've been in law enforcement, that was the best piece of advice anyone has ever given me." He said, "I went to the shift, I introduced myself to the team, and I just watched how they worked." And he's like, "They taught me so much about leadership. And then I started implementing small changes to make things better." He told me, he's like, "I now realize that if I would have went to that team and made all of these changes too quickly, I would have lost every one of them."
It's funny because I'm a big sports guy, and I like sports analogies. And recently, the Chicago Bears head coach was fired. And one of the things that was talked about often right after he was fired was that he had lost the locker room. When you're the leader, when you metaphorically, you lose the locker room, you're no longer leading, you're only managing. And that's a dangerous position for you as a leader, but it's also dangerous for your people, isn't it?
It is. It is. You know, you have to earn their trust and respect. That doesn't come automatically with the stars, stripes, or bars that you have on your uniform. You have to earn it. And I think if you give people the credit that they're due and the autonomy to do their job, and then you use the power of rewarding them, just saying thank you at the end of the day, they will teach you how to be a good leader. And then you can gradually implement small changes. But that's one of the biggest fears, I think, is when a new sergeant takes over, is fear of the unknown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and the thing is, no matter what organization you're working in, most organizations are not large enough for you when you get promoted not to go and have to lead the people that you used to work with, your former colleagues.
Correct.
And that's a very difficult thing to do, to go from being their buddy to being their boss. It's almost like you have to start over building their trust, because they trusted you when you were their colleague, but now
Yes.
I have to earn their trust as their boss.
Yes. And you sort of switch roles a little bit, because as an officer, people could tell me pretty much anything.
Mm-hmm.
As a sergeant, they'd be like, "Hey, Wayne, can I tell you something?" And I'm like, "Yes, but keep in mind that depending on what you tell me, I may have to take some sort of action."
Right. But would you agree with me? Would you agree with me that it's much like community policing, and that you're building this trust, right? And you have to trust, they have to trust that you as the leader have their best interests at heart.
Yes.
They may not like the process, but as long as they believe that I'm doing what I'm doing because it's best for you, it's best for your teammates, then they can perhaps live with the outcome.
Absolutely. And when you do that and they know that you have their best interest, then you start building that referent power. Mm-hmm. with your officers. The team I had on midnight shift, they were so good that they would call me when they did something that they thought might result in a complaint before it even got to me.
Yeah.
And you couldn't ask for anything better, right? Give me a heads up.
Yeah, listen, the worst thing is being surprised, right?
Yes, sir.
Give me that heads up. It's like my kids. So sometimes I'll talk to them. They can, hey, listen, I'm not saying you're going to. I'm not saying you're going to, but you might get an email or a call from a teacher. But here's what happened, but yes. It's like, as my partners used to say, sometimes you just got to dime yourself out. You may not get rid of the punishment, but you may lessen it by doing that.
And as a leader, that's great, right? I mean, you can't ask for anything better.
But that only comes about though if they trust you.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Eventually, sergeant wasn't good enough for you. And so you make your decision that you're going to go and you're going to take a lieutenant position.
Yes.
I think it's important because this is one of the things I struggle with, Wayne. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yes.
All right. A lieutenant in an organization. So you're 2 layers up now. Okay. Mm-hmm. Realistically, the people you should be leading, your direct reports are the sergeants. But I think too often we don't trust those people in those positions, and we try to lead directly to the front line. As a leader, you have to become a leader of leaders. You kind of cut your sergeants off at the knees if you go directly to the frontline people, don't you?
Yes, you kind of do. You kind of do. And I always took the mentality, though, even as a sergeant and with as a lieutenant, you can disagree with me. You can disagree with me behind closed doors as loudly as you want to. Mm-hmm. But the minute we walk out in front of the troops, we all have to be on the same page. Now, when I got promoted to lieutenant, I took the position of deputy commander in patrol on one of the districts, and my captain, Mike Shintrup, took me under his wing, and he sort of taught me how to be a lieutenant, and how that now you're still dealing with the officers, but your primary concern is dealing with the sergeants and getting them all on the same page. And that was it is a different dynamic.
Yeah, because you talked earlier about your perspective has to change.
It does. Yes.
But here's the other piece though. My guess is you probably cared for the frontline officers that you supervised as a sergeant.
Yes,
it's very
absolutely
difficult separating yourselves from that and developing that same type of relationship with the sergeants.
Yes.
Because, let's be honest with each other, buddy. You and I both were sergeants. Sergeants, a lot of times, they sometimes unjustly, but a lot of times justly get that reputation of being old, salty, stuck in their ways.
Yes.
they're not as easy to love
No,
as the new officers are. But Wayne, I guess one of the things that always bothered me when I was a sergeant was that if I had one of my bosses that skipped over me and went to one of my people and gave them a task or gave them something they had to do,
absolutely.
I was still being held responsible if they didn't get it done, but I had no idea what was going on. And that was very frustrating for me. So how does a leader then, when you make that jump up and now you're not doing the frontline people, you're supervising other leaders, how do you develop that relationship? How does that relationship develop with somebody that also has formal authority, but not as much as you?
Well, the chain of command is in place for a reason. And yes, as the title deputy commander, I had that position. But between me and Mike was the commander, he was the captain. The sergeant really didn't have to come to me before they went to Mike. So that dynamic really didn't play out there. Now, as a sergeant, it was very clear that the chain of command existed and it was there for a reason. And you don't have to tell me that you're going to the lieutenant, the patrol commander. You don't have to tell me what you're going to them with, but you do have to give me the courtesy of telling me that they're bypassing me for some reason. And that's good. That's all you have to tell me. So that's sort of how that dynamic played out.
I think that one of the things, and I say, I'm using it plural, but I'm talking about me, and maybe it affected other people. One of the things is that you almost feel hurt when somebody does that, but that's one of those things that it's not just about earning the trust of my people. It's also giving trust in return. And I think a leader has to find a way to trust the people that they're leading. So when something like that does happen, they don't take it personally. They don't see it. They recognize that there are times where I'm not the right person to address what they need.
Yes, absolutely. I think human nature is to go directly to the place where you say, well, what did I do wrong? What don't you like about my performance? And you automatically assume, or I did, that it was about me.
Yeah.
And 9 out of 10 times, it probably was not. It was just I wasn't the right person for that issue.
It's important for leaders to recognize that they can't be all things to all people. We simply don't have that capacity.
No, we do not.
As much fun as you had in Gainesville, at some point you decided to pull the plug, right?
I did.
I'm not going to say you're doing it wrong, but your retirement looks remarkably different than a lot of retired people that I know. You seem to be a pretty busy guy.
Yes, Mike, between traveling and teaching and then working part-time at a police academy, I think I'm busier now than I ever was when I was working. But that's okay because I love every minute of what I'm doing.
You must be doing things right at home, too, because as our intro stated, you've been married for a while.
Yes.
We're not going to get specifics here, but how important is it for a leader to ensure that they are nurturing that relationship at home, too, so when you do have to travel, when you do have to put in the extra time, there's no resentment there? Because that's a very easy thing to neglect.
Oh, it's tremendous. And I think my wife is my biggest source of inspiration. A lot of the things I accomplished, I don't think I could have done without her encouragement. Anything I tell her I want to do, for instance, a year ago, I was like, I think I want to write a book. And she's like, well, get your behind in gear and write it. And we have a system, and I think a good team has to have a system in place. And we use a shared calendar, and if she wants to plan something for us, then she puts it on the calendar, and I'm always cognizant of that and look at the calendar before I schedule anything. Because if I'm not careful, I can get very busy.
Well, it's funny you should talk about writing the book, and we'll come back to the book in just a second. But one of our previous guests, John Robinson, wrote a book called Compelling Force Leadership. And he learned something about his wife during that process. Well, she's always very supportive. But one thing he learned is that she is meticulous when it comes to proofing. He said, man, I thought I was done with the revisions on this book. And she'd come back, you know what? I think you got this chapter all wrong. I think from a leadership perspective, it's a good way of looking at it. Sometimes being a leader requires us to be brutally honest, not mean, but brutally honest with those that we are leading, and sometimes those we are being led by.
Yes, absolutely. Similar situation. My wife has always been my editor. She enjoyed editing the book. She did not enjoy editing my papers when I was in grad school. But she is very good with that red pen, and I certainly appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it, the end product, but there are times in the middle where I'm kind of going,
yes,
mumbling.
I'm tired. I've read this 10 times.
I got an idea. Why don't you write it yourself if you think you're so much better at it?
Right.
But tell me about the book. Tell me the title and tell me what it's about. But I would really love to know what it was that inspired you to sit down and write the book.
Well, and I'll start with the last chapter in the book about retirement wisdom. And I don't think our influence as leaders stop when we retire. That's simply a chapter in our lives. And I didn't want my influence to stop. If you spend 30 years in a profession, 28 years in law enforcement, 2 years in corrections, and then you put the military in on top of that, there's a lot of things that we learn. We learn them the hard way sometimes. And this book was just to pass on knowledge. If one person picks this book up and it helps them in any way, if that's the only copy that ever sells, then it was a win for me. I wrote this book from a conversational tone. I didn't want a textbook. And I talked about some of the things that I went through in life and why they're important. I wanted it to be a personal story. If you know me, it probably reads a little bit better. If you don't know me, you still will appreciate the stories, but the leadership lessons are there. And then I didn't want to just write a book and just write a chapter and then just leave it there. So at the end of every chapter, there's a page that says, now it's your turn. And I ask a series of questions. For example, I start my book with my childhood, because I think that's where a lot of our character and a lot of our personality traits that shine through in our leadership style are instilled. The things that we go through as children, as that our guardians, our parents, whomever, instilled in us. So that's kind of where I started the book. And yes, it was a bucket list item that I can cross off now. Check, I'm done with that. I'm glad I did it. I'm really happy with the finished product. And I really think that if you read it, you can incorporate some of those things into your leadership style. But I also talk about getting better personally. It's my opinion that if we improve ourselves personally, then we will get better professionally. But it starts with me as a person. It's
hard to be a good, effective leader if you're not a good person.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So what's the name of the book?
It's a Lifetime of Service.
And that's available, if I'm not mistaken, on Amazon.
Yes, it is.
And we're going to include the link to that in our episode notes. And I've got good news for you, sir. Well, you may consider it good news. I don't know. But this year, we're putting out a Faces of Leadership recommended gift list for our listeners. And your book made the list. That's going to be actually is probably going to be released a few days before this episode will. So we're going to put out a list of books that we recommend. Yours is on there. And folks, if you've listened to this podcast, you've been to one of my trainings, you know that I'm a huge fan of General James Mattis. General Mattis, he described a book as an author from across the times sitting down and sharing their experiences with you so you don't have to repeat the same mistakes that they did. And I think that's just is such an eloquent way of looking at what a book is supposed to be about. I would imagine that as hard as it was, as much work as it was for you to write the book, it had to be good to get all that stuff out. You know what I mean? This is stuff I've been wanting to share with people. And
absolutely.
But ultimately, and you already said it, if it helps one person, the book was a success.
It was a success. And Mike, I also wrote it from the perspective of, this was my leadership journey. I hope that it helps you, but by no means is this the only way to do something. I learned that 5 seconds into being an FTO, that there was 14 ways of doing something. And I didn't want to write a book to say, hey, this is the way you do it. This is the only way you do it. And if you do it like this, you'll be successful. Yeah. Because that's just not correct.
Another one of my heroes, General Colin Powell, the late General
Yes,
Colin
sir.
Powell, wrote a book, It Worked for Me. And I love that title right there because it just, it says exactly what you just said. Hey, this worked for me. It may not work for you, but understand that this helped make me successful. And you certainly are successful. Listen, not only have you written a book, not only are you teaching at a police academy, all right?
Yes, sir.
But you also do work with an FTO organization, don't you?
Yes, sir, I do.
What's the name of that organization?
Southeastern Field Training Officers Association, or SEFTOA, SEFTOA. It's a nonprofit organization, and we exist solely for trainers. That's our sole purpose, is to bring good training through our annual conference to trainers, both in law enforcement and corrections.
Your conference has been growing in numbers and in quality. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes, that would be accurate.
And in fact, you guys are moving your conference, at least this year, to a new city, a new state. And if I'm not mistaken, it's happening in May, isn't it?
It's May, and we will be in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Beautiful place. If you've never been there, folks.
Yes, sir.
We'll make sure we post the information for the conference in the episode page.
And if I can give it a short plug, if you just
plug away, man.
If you type SEFTOA, SEFTOA, into any search engine, it will take you to our website. We have the event registration on there, but we also have the full agenda, so you can see the lineup of speakers.
I think it's important to point out here, and we've mentioned it before on the podcast, it has been our experience that no matter what the profession, no matter what industry you're in, some of the most undertrained people in an organization are the people responsible for training others. And it's because they're up there. Folks, this is a tremendous opportunity for you to invest in your people who are investing in others.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But again, that's not enough either, for crying out loud, because we also talked about it in your intro about advanced police concepts. How did you come to be involved with that organization?
Well, Mike Shintrup, the owner and founder, I worked with Mike my entire career. I retired and relocated to another state, and a couple of years into retirement, I just happened to walk into the house one day. I'd been outside and my phone was ringing, and it was Mike Shintrup. And Mike's like, I think I might have an opportunity for you if you're interested. So that was 5 years ago. And I've been teaching for Advanced Police Concepts. I teach their leadership for frontline supervisors and advanced FTO class for them.
What I heard and what you just said there was that Mike missed you, and this was just an opportunity.
Mike missed you. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
You go and move away, and he said, that's not going to get you away from me, son. So.
That's right. Do a good job for me. I'll show you.
Would it be safe to say that he made an impact on your career, especially your leadership career?
Yes. And I have to be completely transparent. Probably for the first 17 years of my career, Mike and I really never crossed paths.
Wow.
Our agency wasn't huge by any means. We're about 305 sworn on a good day. But Mike and I never really crossed paths. So when I became his deputy commander, that's the first time that Mike and I had really worked with each other. Post-retirement, Mike and I are fantastic friends, and he has had a huge impact on me and my leadership, even in retirement, as a mentor. Mike is very good about seeing things globally and telling me, Wayne, I don't think this will work, or Wayne, let's give this a try.
It's funny, and I'm going to give him another shout out. I talked about on previous episodes, but a good friend of mine named Rick Mitchell. Rick and I didn't cross paths until he had retired from his first police agency. And he came to my agency as a communications manager. But It's one of those things when we cross paths, dude, it was like instant. You know what I mean? And to this day, Rick continues to make an investment in me and continues to impact what I do. And as a result, because of the jobs that you and I do, going out and speaking to other people, they're having legacy, generational impact on people. And there are very few jobs where you get to say that.
That's correct. Yes, absolutely.
We're to the part of the program where I'm going to give you some of my biggest takeaways from today. And you get the chance to correct me or enhance upon what I'm saying. So the first thing we talked about that really had me thinking was that when you are placed in charge of leading some type of organizational change, and it can be on an organization level, it can be on a team level, probably the hardest part is selling it. And selling it is infinitely easier if the people trust you.
Yes, sir, it is. And when I tell sergeants that they are salesmen, some of them will kind of look at me funny. And they're like, I'm not a salesman. And I'm like, well, yes, you are. And, you don't have to agree with it or even like it. But if your officers, if they don't believe you believe in it, they're certainly not going to buy in it.
Well, and you just said something there. I'm going to have to add to my key takeaways. Oftentimes, the hardest person to sell it to is yourself.
Yes, it is.
But you still have to do it. Next thing is start the important stuff on day number one. And what I mean there is if you want to make an impact on your new people, it needs to be intentional and it needs to start right away.
Yes, it does. And as a matter of fact, last year at the ILEADA conference, International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association conference, I did a block on leadership from day one and asked the question, why are we as leaders not sending new officers to training classes, to leadership classes? They think like leaders. They think more globally. It's a win-win for everyone.
Well, and the truth of the matter is, no matter how much time they got on the job, when they respond to a call for service, guess who's a leader of that scene?
Yes, sir. That officer.
Yep. I love what you said about FTO being in a leadership position. I think that if organizations start seeing their trainers as leaders, they're going to get better training and they're going to have better leaders.
Yes, they will. And you set them up to be future sergeants, lieutenants, chiefs, captains, what have you. And a lot of times, I believe our profession, we sort of set people up to derail themselves in that we put them in these positions without any training or any succession planning.
Yep.
Let's start from day one. Yeah. Let's start building the organization we'd like to see in the future.
Absolutely. And I actually did a class on it, the future face of leadership. One of the most important things that a leader can see is that future person.
Yes.
And I love this part right here where you were talking about, especially in the military, where they would question you about your decision. And they weren't saying that you did something wrong, but they were looking for the articulation, the thought process behind it. And I think that is something that is lacking in most organizations is stop looking for gotcha moments and start looking for the process. Because if the process good and the outcome wasn't so good, we can work on that. But if there's a problem with the process, that's where catastrophic things start to happen.
And I think as leaders at any level, and I use the word leader as anyone that the minute you decide to help someone grow, you became a leader.
Absolutely.
And we look to those people to make decisions and not only make them, but to stand by them.
Yes. Right,
wrong, or indifferent. Stand by your decision.
This was a key takeaway that because I did it wrong, and you confirm that. As leaders, we have to be careful. Stop expecting your people to be you. I want them to be led by you, but that doesn't mean they need to be you.
No, our job is to get them to where they want to be. Mm-hmm. I sat down with the new officers and I'm like, what do you want to do in 5 years? And even if they told me in 5 years, I hope to be working for a federal agency, I was like, well, let's see what we need to do to get you there.
Yep.
I always thought that was my job.
Yeah, because listen, quite honestly, in an organization, if you have somebody who is there who doesn't want to be, they're probably not doing a very good job in that position.
Correct. Yes.
And it could be for a good reason why they want to leave. It doesn't mean them wanting to leave doesn't reflect negatively on your organization sometimes. Sometimes it's just a reflection of how they need to grow.
Yes. And I always thought that made us look even better. If we had 3 or 4 officers that went to the federal agencies, that tells me that leadership is doing something right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leaders have to change their perspective. The higher in the organization you go, the higher your perspective has to be.
Yes, because at that level, your decisions doesn't just impact me and my small team. It can impact an entire organization and the community.
That was the big thing right there. We often forget that what we do internally often has impact externally.
Yes, sir.
And
absolutely,
a leader needs to understand that ripple effect, if you will, that decisions can have. Finally, the last thing that I really took away was be open to change. I had a guest on here a few episodes ago, Karen Brash, and she talked about she was a helicopter pilot in the Navy. And so I asked her about that transition that she made once she retired from the Navy, how she managed it. I think because she's super successful. And she said this, she said, Mike, you know what? She goes, I always wanted flying helicopters to be a chapter in my story, but I didn't want them to be my story. And so when we talk about being open to change, the things that you've done post-retirement continue to have impact. It's just a different type of impact from a different platform, isn't it?
It is. It is. And probably 2 of the longest chapters in my book for a reason are leading through change and the importance of communication. You know, looking back at, like I said, I was always the one that looked for the negative as an officer because it was the easy thing to do. And then I realized that, no, we need to start looking for the positive in things because realistically, change impacts us very little most of the time. And as a former leader, it was my job to sort of mitigate that and stop the forest fire before it got out of control. And that boiled down to effective communication.
It's amazing how many issues, no matter what industry, we're talking about society, but how many issues are caused by poor or lack of communication.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Well, Wayne, it's been a blast having you on here today, man. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. In fact, I know that you've got a meeting coming up here you got to jump off for. But thank you so much for spending some time with us today, man.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And for our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you enjoyed the episode, and we certainly hope you did, and if you didn't, I don't understand why, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. You can find this and all our other episodes on our website at commandpresence.net/podcast. You can also find us over on LinkedIn. We try to put out some stuff over there, and we're also on YouTube. Please go and check out the podcast over on YouTube if you like that platform, and if you do, hit the subscribe button. We appreciate you being here today, and as you go throughout the week, folks, please remember, be the leader you wish you had.